do the Cardinals need to look now at the bullpen market based off of the injuries? I don't believe they're going to get any sort of good news going forward regarding Keaton Middleton. I mean, it sure seems that he's just looking for a surgeon, just to give the procedure that will shut him down for the rest of the season and kind of go from there and just try to rehab back. I mean, it looks like Giovanni Gallegos is on the up and up, that they might get him here soon. Who knows? I mean, you talk about O'Brien that could be back. I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I haven't heard anything encouraging on him in a while. And when it comes to Keenan, like, even if it's not Tommy John, as Will Carroll mentioned, flexor tendon, like, you could have a surgery to repair that. If there's UCL damage, then it would be Tommy John or a repair to that ligament. Either way, I don't think Keenan's ever going to pitch for the Cardinals. Now, if it goes well, maybe they could sign him again in free agency, but that was only a 1-year deal, if I'm not mistaken. So it's just going to be kind of a blip on the historical radar of Cardinal history, that he will have pitched for the Springfield Cardinals, but probably never for the St. Louis Cardinals. And that stinks, because I thought he would have been a really nice righty to add to this mix. When it comes to Riley O'Brien, I had high hopes for him to be, a legitimate difference maker, but it's just been, kind of very much a slow process. He's been throwing. Maybe he can throw off of a mound was the last word about a week ago, but that hasn't necessarily been ramped up yet. So if he's able to come back, it's probably going to be some amount of time. It's not going to be soon. And then Gio, let's not say he wasn't hurt with the shoulder impingement, but what impinged his shoulder seemed to be how many home runs he kept giving up, so they could get him back, but is he really going to be a different version of himself? Did this time off help him? The Cardinals should have to hope so. But Andy, if you're talking about those three guys that you thought would all be prominent, and believe me, they thought Riley would be prominent. With the way they talked about him in spring and the way he looked in spring, there was high hopes that he would be a mainstay, and only really got to pitch like 1 or 2 times at the beginning of the year, and that was it. So I'm wondering, is it too early to be talking about trade concepts for the Cardinals to go after some specifically right-handed relief help? Because you've got JoJo from the left side. You've got John King, who's done a nice job from the left side. And obviously now Matthew Liberatore back in as a lefty. The right side, I think, is where they're going to need some help, Andy, in terms of leverage guys, circle of trust caliber names. All 3 injured guys were supposed to be a part of that, and none of them are on the active roster right now. So if you're Mo, what do? Do you start to really be aggressive in that market, or is it just too early to be making those types of moves because that's not a market that's necessarily hot and moving right now?
I don't think it's too early. I think you at least put the pulse on the market and see what's available to you. I mean, the hard thing is that you're trying to determine the teams that are, I guess, willing to sell at this point, knowing that they don't have any use for this right-handed reliever for the rest of their season. They have to. That's a very hard line to walk, because you shouldn't be giving up pitching help if you are a team that's on the fringe and you think, well, maybe we'll be competitive in a month, but it's maybe not all that clear. That's why it's very tough now.
Yeah, and it's tough, too, because you have to really probably work the phones. It's not abundantly evident which teams are going to be willing to part ways with major league talent at this point in the calendar. You can look at the standings and have a pretty good idea, but I don't know that it's going to be as clear as it would be in July, when you're probably getting calls, right, on teams floating their right-handed relievers. If you're John Mozeliak, you probably have to be the one to do the digging on this, because the Cardinals are the one that I think, Andy, they get into a state of desperation if they don't get this situation rectified soon, which can happen via trade, or it can happen via the internal options, figuring out the alignment that you need. Guys like Ryan Fernandez, who was a Rule 5 pickup, but then has really assimilated, and now you do think of him as a guy kind of teetering toward that circle of trust. Even if he's not totally in it, we've seen him close out games when the main names were not available. That's the level I'm talking about. I think you've got Fernandez on that level, and you've got Libby from the left side kind of neck and neck on that level where, you'll use these guys in some close games in kind of medium leverage, if you will, and kind of take your chances. But that next crop of relievers, the guys that you're willing to send to Memphis, and I get it. Will Carroll mentioned it. The Cardinals are trying to basically manage a bullpen in such a way that they have 15 or 16 relievers available to them, because you can just keep cycling through all the guys that have options and that are riding that Memphis shuttle. Now you have to wait 15 days to bring a guy back up after you send him down, unless there's another injury. which is why I don't love that you take a guy, Ryan Ludus, who had a couple of games and did well, but you send him right back because you are so desperate for a fresh arm tonight that when Ludus pitched last night, you can't afford to keep him there if you anticipate that he couldn't give you 2 innings, like a Chris Roycroft might be able to do and very well could be asked to do tonight for the Cardinals. So it's just a matter of, you thought you'd have more of those leverage guys than you do healthy and available and effective to you. And now that you don't, how aggressive do you want to be in cutting this off at the pass and making sure it's not a season-long problem? Because what happens is, A, you lose games like you did last night because your manager's hands are tied with how to make certain decisions. But also, like, you can see the downstream effect of all of your guys that you've been relying heavily upon are not really going to have that breathing room and that opportunity to rest at times to stay effective and still be good when you get to August and September. How many times have we seen guys get burnt out early in a summer, and then at the latter stages you think, oh, this isn't suddenly the reliable guy anymore that he was in April, May, and June? That's the other part that can happen. The parts of this Cardinal bullpen that we know are elite, what if they stop being as good because you've demanded so much of them? That's an angle that could happen as well.
It's very tough to try and decipher what the Cardinals could do. 875-KTGR to call or text us. And then you're not only identifying the team, but you're having to identify the player, and that gets even more tricky.
Call everybody.
To try and do. Like,
because you can. What if you went and it wasn't maybe a trade that you're trading prospects for a reliever, but somebody needs some outfield help, and you say, hey, we've got Dylan Carlson. Maybe, we take a loss on him and kind of cut our losses because in a perfect world, he's a contributor and he's cost controlled and he's going to be an ARB for several more years.
Right.
But if you need a fix right now and Dylan's not helping your team as much as a right-handed reliever that you trust would, even if that guy's on an expiring contract, I could see Dylan's value being low enough to where the Cardinals go, if we can get that deal done, we probably do it. So that would be the only way, Andy. Do you provide maybe some value to another team who maybe they're in the mix, kind of like the Cardinals around 500, but they're not a bona fide club, and they say, you know what, we've got some guys in AAA that we want to try out in our bullpen. We'll make that trade because what we don't have is an outfielder that maybe they believe Dylan Carlson could be. And it might not be a perfect example because I don't think people are looking at Dylan's numbers right now and saying, yeah, that's the missing piece for our team. But that's kind of the idea that maybe you could consider if you're the Cardinals. And there will be fans that say they gave up on Dylan too early. But, I mean, if you're watching him lately, it just has not been strong. Well, so that's got to be an option, I think.
It has to be. It's almost your only one. I don't know what else you could turn to say, oh, it's going to be enticing enough for a team to, even with a reliever that has an expiring contract, which I'm kind of going through and I'm looking to see which ones.
Wondering who that might be.
Options. You want a reunion with John Brebbia? I mean, I don't know.
Actually, I don't think that's a bad idea at all.
Yeah, that might not be with the White Sox right now. The White Sox are selling anybody. You probably don't even have to give up that much.
Brebbia is struggling, for the record. He's got like a 70 ERA.
Yeah, I'm not looking at anybody's stats while looking at this. I'm just looking at contracts. No. But anyway.
Totally fair. And like last night, that 8th inning, John Brebbia, the years he was on the Cardinals, that's his spot. You know what I'm saying? They don't have their John Brebbias this year. They don't have those guys that they thought, Riley O'Brien could have been their John Brebbia, or maybe not. I mean, Riley throws smoke, but like they just don't have that tier of moderate leverage right-handed relievers when your main setup men are down or have already been used in the game, and it's an obvious spot for a righty. What do? Leahy has exceeded expectations, in my opinion. He's still got a 4.80 ERA. I just don't think that was an option that, look, it's easy to say because we don't get to actually watch it play out to know if he would have blown the game too. But if you lose because Leahy blows the game versus you lose because Jojo Romero, who comes in with a 1.5 or better ERA, blows the game, then you go, all right, so he blew a game. Like, it's going to happen. We've asked a lot of him. We can see how it materialized based on the error here and the walk there. Like, you can draw the path and understand how it happened. With Leahy, I think you're just kicking yourself going, man, why didn't we just let it see it? What would it have looked like if we had gone with our best reliever and had him out there instead of Kyle Leahy, who, is just probably not a leverage guy at this point.
Give us your thoughts, Cardinal fans. Do they need to be in the bullpen trade market right now on June 4th? 875-KTGR to call or text us here. I mean, at least you have to see what teams would be willing to be part with at this point in their seasons. And you're looking at what's hard is that you're looking at the teams that are struggling now. I mean, you're looking at the White Sox. You're looking at maybe the Mets or the Angels or teams that know they're out of it. Like this year is not the year. It's not happening this year. Diamonds in the rough that you're trying to find out there that can help your team now to bridge a gap that needs to be bridged as soon as possible. Because again, you're in the middle of June, or not the middle of June, but you're in the middle of a race, even though it's still kind of early, where if you burn out your bullpen at this point, it will come back to bite you in August. 100%.
Yeah, and those guys aren't going to be as effective in August. You will have lost a few extra games in the standings in August, so that it just doesn't make sense to me. Again, if your goal is to contend, if the Cardinals' goal is to just say, let's see which way the wind blows and we'll treat the deadline accordingly, then keep doing the status quo and seeing where that gets you. If you are saying, look, we want to make our own destiny and realize that we've got a deficit right now, and that if we don't do something about it, instead of being a game above 500 at the deadline where we're still in the mix for the division and the wild card, maybe you're 4 games below 500 at the deadline, and it's not as realistic then to make a move as a buyer. Like, I don't necessarily see a team that's way under 500 aggressively buying at the deadline, even if they have obvious needs, but don't let it get that far. Like, if you still think it's valuable to go and try and win now and you want to send that message to your fan base, you go make a trade within the next couple of weeks. And I don't think it's crazy to suggest that they could do that. Teams do it all the time. You have a need. I don't know that there is a spot in baseball that's as easy to trade for as relief help because there are so many of them, right? Yes, you're going to be constrained to the teams that are basically out of it. I'm telling you, it may not feel good. You might have to overpay because teams say, look, I'd rather wait till the deadline when there's a bidding war. But if you're the Cardinals, I do think it's incumbent upon John Mozeliak to do his due diligence on all of the teams that you mentioned that are just probably out of the races already and try and convince them that they want to be sellers. Like, don't wait for them to do it. And look, even if it's a change of scenery guy, even if it's a John Brebbia caliber guy who hasn't been pitching well, that's probably not going to cost you very much. And so it's potentially worthwhile to at least check in on Andy and say, look, if those guys come in and they're still just as bad with their new team as they were with their old team, all right, you're kind of in the same spot you were in. You can cast him aside. You probably didn't give up much via trading for a guy that looks like damaged goods at the time, but it's worth a try. It's worth the attempt to try and shake up this bullpen in a way that you get into another situation like last night. You don't feel like your only option is the guy already on the mound, even though you've got 3 guys in the bullpen that you're a right-handed that you're not going to use in that spot. You don't want to get to that again.
No. I mean, you're trying to target somebody who, again, is maybe on a bad team now, is probably older. You're probably looking at a guy mid-30s that's only going to be available to you. You're not going to get somebody who's on, the prime of their career. You're just trying to get the bodies in the room that you can trust for 4 months to get you through some high leverage spots. At times, it's not even to say that you're looking for a new closer. You're just looking for one more guy that can join this group when it gets somewhat healthy going forward. And, if Gallegos enters the mix once again, that helps things out a little bit. Of course, Gallegos does need to figure out, his own issues. It hasn't been all that great. Maybe you get a reliever that, emerges somehow. Roycroft was okay when he was first up. Maybe he gets a second chance here, or, if they keep cycling through all those guys, using options here and there to try and get somebody going from AAA Memphis, then maybe that's icing on the cake. But you're just looking for someone with experience in these spots that you can have for 4 months and really just try to make that push. That's all you need. You don't need to commit so much time and energy to one person here with this trade. Just, see if you can find a bargain somewhere.
A quality right-handed middle reliever that could moonlight as a setup man when your other setup men that you'd normally use are down. That's really all you're talking about. You need another Ryan Fernandez caliber arm, which is mid, right? That's the middle of your bullpen, not the top end, not the end that's the highest of the high leverage. You just need another arm that fits into that cushy middle grouping rather than, we feel like we've only got bottom of the totem pole guys and we don't want to rely upon them in a 1-run game in the 8th. That's what they ran into last night. And it's either, you do come to a point where those guys are going to have to be your options, and you just give them the chance because they're all you've got, or you recognize that that's probably not going to result in any more additional wins because there are reasons you don't necessarily trust those guys because they're maybe just not on that level at this point. Now, maybe Ludus is. That's the shame of what happened is because they didn't get the win and because he had to pitch in the downside of it anyway, they had to burn him back to Memphis, even though maybe he would have been the answer, and now you're not going to get a chance to find out more about him for 15 days.
875-KTGR, if you want to call or text us. I think I found a candidate. I think I found an option. I have no idea whether there's any sort of connection here between these two. Look up Luke Jackson for the Giants.
How bad have the Giants been, though? Aren't they like right in the wild card race, though?
I mean, I suppose
same record as the Cardinals.
How bad the National League has been, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean I think they're right in the mix, which is what makes it tough, right? You almost are constrained to the teams that are way below 500, whereas the Giants are just 3 games under. They're in the mix. It's maybe
one of those mutual decisions for both sides. Give us some value, we'll give you some back as well. It can happen between two contending teams at this point, probably.
It just
you consider
depends,
both of these teams contending. They're in the same bucket right now.
Yeah, that's not the point, though. What are you giving the Giants that they need that actually allows them to continue progressing toward their goals? That's the problem with it, because you don't really have anything to offer outside of the outfielder that we mentioned. But, are there teams that are really thinking Dylan Carlson's the missing piece that they're trading? No. That's where it gets a little bit dicey.
That's why, and I didn't necessarily say that it was just Dylan Carlson that you're trying to trade here. You would have
but who else are you offering basically to a team right neck and neck with you in the standings that makes them say, we'll send a middle reliever that we're actually using for blank. That blank can be difficult to fill, is just my thought.
A lot of people coming after Ollie Marmol for this game, right?
There were. Yeah, there were a lot of people.
Is that justified? I don't know if it is.
No, it's not. Here, and I get it. Anytime a reliever blows a game, the manager brought in the wrong guy or he left the wrong guy in too long. That's always going to be the narrative. And you said something that's half right. The Cardinals don't have enough guys, but specifically, they don't have enough reliable, trusted, circle of trust, right-handed relievers. That's really the spot they ran into last night, because Ryan Helsley, like it or not, and I do happen to think it's the right move, is reserved for the 9th inning. He is that traditional closer. He is no longer the guy that's you're going to bring him in for 5 outs, and then you're going to bring him in on a back-to-back, and then you're going to you can do one or the other, and what they're doing is, they'll pitch him back-to-back, but he's their closer. So he wasn't going to come into the game in the 8th inning last night. He just wasn't. If you want to be mad about that, you can be, but that's months and months we have known this to be the case.
I'm mad about that, but that's not the biggest thing that,
okay.
I'm fine with, your progression and going through it, that you go through the options that you have. I necessarily would not have necessarily gone that way, but I digress anyway.
So when you look at the way the game unfolded last night, it's nice to be able to contextualize things before just getting upset. And then once you have the context, if you want to be upset, I say go for it. Bully for you. But the reality is, in that 6th inning, Kyle Gibson was wearing down. It was pretty clear to me that he was wearing down. I was honestly even surprised that Ollie Marmol let him face John Singleton. But if you kind of look a little bit deeper, it made sense, because the two relievers warming up were lefty Matthew Liberatore and righty Andrew Kittredge. And if you were to bring Matthew Liberatore in to face lefty John Singleton, Andy, as an Astros fan, probably knows that matchup's not going to happen. The Astros are going to make a change. You're going to pinch hit.
Yeah.
And they had Jose Abreu on the bench, so I know he's not having a great season, but that was going to be a matchup that's not conducive to Matthew Liberatore, who's got like a 950 opposing OPS when he faces right-handed batters this season. It's why he really didn't make for a good starter. He could get out lefties. He wasn't able to get out righties. And as a starter, you got to face everybody. So Libby wouldn't have been a good option there. I think if you're Joe Espada, you're almost bluffing Marmol into hoping that Marmol is dumb enough to make that choice. Marmol is not dumb enough to make that choice. But on the other side, Andrew Kittredge is actually kind of splitty himself. He's got a 900 opposing OPS to left-handed batters. So if you bring in Kittredge, that's not a great option against John Singleton with 2 men on base either. And once Jeremy Pena stole second, I was kind of thinking they're going to be careful with him, and they're just going to walk this batter not on purpose, but make Singleton get himself out or live to fight another day. And once that walk happens, suddenly Marmol has more options because they're not going to necessarily take out the catcher Diaz. I guess you could have because Caratini's a switch hitter and they could maybe bring him in to catch. But that's maybe overmanaging a little bit in the sixth. So then you bring in Kittredge, righty on righty, you get the matchup you want. The problem is he had to get the last out of the sixth. And then when you go into the seventh inning, does a nice job, but the third batter reaches via error. Nolan Gorman. We've seen this Cardinal defense struggle. They made a number of errors last night, and I think Gorman's error is probably the biggest play in the game that people don't maybe say a lot about, because what it made sure had to happen is that Yordan Alvarez got to bat in the seventh. Okay, Jojo Romero is the guy that's going to face Yordan, and he got him. It was a great AB. It was some compelling baseball to watch. Foul ball, slider, foul ball, fastball up in the zone, foul ball. It was a true battle between two guys who are great at their craft. JoJo got him, but then what happens? The adrenaline release, you got out of the seventh, great. You go sit down for a while, and then you have to come back. And I think if you have Yordan leading off the eighth, facing JoJo Romero, and then Alex Bregman, I think JoJo can get through that inning. But after Andy, he comes back out, he was just flat in the eighth. JoJo's stuff was not the same. It was on a back-to-back for JoJo Romero, which is the first time. Remember, he went like 6 days without pitching, and then he goes back-to-back. So is that maybe just he got rested and recuperated, but he's not used to the grind of pitching at this volume the way that he was a week or two ago when he was just being used all the time? It kind of can be a double-edged sword, maybe, that notion of rest. So anyway, JoJo ends up having that spot, but the righty relievers, if you wanted to, after the Bregman homer, go another direction before the Diaz homer eventually sinks the Cardinals, bunch of righties that you would have faced, Andy, JoJo Romero, or would you rather have Ryan Ludus or Kyle Leahy face the Astros hitters, knowing that JoJo, the one reliever, he's not splitty. He can get lefties out, he can get righties out. They went with JoJo Romero because he's been their best all year. Plain and simple.
Look, I mean, they're probably the options there are probably all similar, which is why I don't think you necessarily need to change it. You can't get all that angry with how it went down, because the options that were at the disposal were not very clearly jumping off the page saying, yes, you need to put this guy in right now because you got to get out of this.
That's not what people say.
Right?
Andy, that's not what Cardinals fans say. You know what
Ryan
they do say?
Ludus and Kyle Leahy, wow, they would have been so much better. Wow.
That's not what they say. What they say is you need to get JoJo out. They don't say who you need to bring in.
They don't say who you need to bring in, right? Yeah,
because
exactly.
That's a hard.
Anybody, put me in.
But that's the thing is, it's not the decision that wasn't made. It's, well, the one they did make was wrong. So now, to the fairness of some fans, I got a lot of comments, people saying, well, Leahy would have been my choice. And if you feel that way, that's fine. I personally don't. I think if, like you said, if they're kind of similar options, all right, Leahy's at least right on right, but he's also a rookie who doesn't have great numbers. He's given up 2 runs, 4 hits in the last 2 times he's pitched, and he's only recorded a total of 3 outs in those 2 times. So it's not like he's pitching good lately. So that's one option, is going Leahy, and if that's how you feel, that's great. The other one being Ludus. He's not even on the roster today because after he pitched an inning, they said, we have to turn this bullpen over in some way, shape, or form and get a fresh arm. It's going to be Chris Roycroft that's on the roster for tonight's game. If you're so willing to send Ludus down just because you need a fresh arm for the next day, he's probably not the quality of player at this point that they trust to come in the 8th inning of a tie game or a 1-run lead. Like, you're not sending that guy down if you trust him in the situation for last night. So they don't choose those options. If it's a tiebreaker of, yeah, they all kind of feel similar, a worn down JoJo or these other guys who aren't as good, I'm going to take a worn down JoJo. If I'm going to get beat, I'm going to get beat by the option that I can sleep at night if I lose that game. If you bring in Kyle Leahy, Andy, and he gives up a home run, I can tell you with 100% certainty that Cardinals fans would have lost their mind. They say they wouldn't have. They say, no, that's what I wanted. I would have. I'm sorry. I don't believe you. Kyle Leahy, we're acting like he's prime Craig Kimbrell. I like Kyle Leahy, but let's contextualize. JoJo was like one of the best relievers in the National League before last night, like a 1.2 ERA. What are we talking about? It just wasn't his night. It happens. And
the thing is, like, the 875 KTGR, get your thoughts in on this. Cardinals bullpen unable to hold the lead against the Astros last night. Call or text us at 875 KTGR. That will happen. Relievers, even the best in the game, will have bad days.
You're telling me they don't end 0.00 ERA at the end of a season?
Shocker, I know, right? That's it. Yeah, that's what happens. They will give up runs every once in a while, sometimes even multiple in a single outing. Imagine that. And guess what? The fact is that the Cardinals are in a spot right now at 28-30 on the season where it's not necessarily that you blame the relievers for having bad days, because that happens throughout an entire season. But right now, you can't afford so many more bad days. You have to have other ways to make up that difference. And you have to find other ways to make sure that your bullpen is not the group that has to save you all of the time to get you through these games. We were looking at some of the stats. I know Brenden Kiley, our friend over at 101 ESPN, was looking at it earlier today. How many times the Cardinals have had to win close games this year?
Every time.
All the time. Ryan Helsley's had to pitch in so many of the Cardinals' wins this year. I think the stat that BK dug up was the fact that they've played in the fewest number of games where they were leading by 4 or more runs going into the 6th or something like that. That's not very many. It was only 5 games that had been the case. At some point, your offense has to pick you up and find ways to put these games out of reach. That way you can use Kyle Leahy or Ryan Ludus, or you can stomach that a little bit more instead of having to use the big guns.
And then, in fairness, you do, as Ollie Marmol, have to be willing to do that, because there was a game against the Reds. They were up 6-1, 7-1, didn't use Ludus for the 9th inning, and absolutely should have. So Ollie also needs to, if I'm going to offer a mild criticism, needs to extend his willingness to open up the options for Circle of Trust and who's eligible to join it by pitching some of these guys that you don't know as much about in the situations that aren't leverage. Granted, as you just alluded to, there aren't very many situations when the Cardinals are ahead and it's not leverage, because it's not a blowout. And that's kind of a weird thing to ask for, to say, hey, you should have some games where you score 8 or 9 and blow these guys out, because it's hard to score 8 or 9 runs in a game. But 30 MLB teams, 29 of the other teams are doing it more often than you. To have that handful plus 8 games, 10 games, 12 games, whatever it should be to this point, where you do have that ability to bring in a Leahy. He can throw 3 innings in a 7-1 win, and you don't have to spend your other relievers. Every time the Cardinals are winning a game, it's been got to go to the triumvirate, got to go to these top relievers, because otherwise we might not win the game. And that's sort of a mindset that is difficult to maintain. It's not sustainable throughout a long season. So, Andy, you touched on the offense. I think that's a great point, and I want to focus on the errors. Even in those moments where you do have to sort of win close and rely on these guys, you can't make their job more difficult by making fielding errors. Gorman had the one again, I think it was so very costly, because if JoJo doesn't have to get up, sit down, and then get back up, and the adrenaline and all of those elements, you're just gonna be flat. It's a hard thing to do, to pitch, sit down, and do it again. And they forced Kittredge and JoJo to do it last night because of just little tiny things that began a domino effect. And the Gorman error was one of them. And then it didn't really make a difference, Andy. But Mason Wynn made his 10th error of the season last night, later on in the game, and that 7th run did score for Houston. Again, Cardinals aren't going to get a hit off of Josh Hader. They're not going to score a run, certainly off of Josh Hader. So it didn't matter. But those are the things that can add up. So when you combine a struggling defense that is not making those timely routine plays and helping out the relievers that are doing their darndest to try to keep this team afloat, and then for one night they don't get it done because, frankly, as we'll talk more about at 5:05, the right-handed options in this bullpen are just few and far between, with Ryan Fernandez having gone back-to-back, so he was down last night, and Helsley being saved for the 9th inning. That's tough on that group. And then, as you mentioned, if the offense is not doing their job, which, part of the job description is scoring a bunch of runs every so often so that everybody else on the team can have a breather. If not, you are just absolutely stricken every night, just hanging on for dear life, trying to win baseball games, and eventually it will come back to haunt you.
So give us your thoughts, Cardinal fans. What did you want to see done differently last night as the Cardinals were unable to secure the win against the Astros, giving up 4 runs in the 8th inning there? 875-KTGR. Give us your thoughts here on the show at 418.
And there was one spot where I would say, as I was thinking through it last night, maybe Ollie could have gone differently with this. What would you have thought, Andy, to the notion of bringing in Matthew Liberatore for that 7th inning Yordan Alvarez spot, having that be designated as the only batter he's going to face if he gets him inning over and JoJo gets a clean 8th inning, versus having to expend a lot of energy, bunch of foul balls, get Yordan out, but then maybe he was a little bit spent, and that's why his sharpness wasn't there on the pitches. Largely, he got some outs in that 8th inning, JoJo did, but there were a couple of pitches that were obviously mistakes, and they were punished. What would you have thought about that opportunity? Because it is a left-on-left matchup. Liberatore is just not, he's not JoJo, so do you trust him in that spot yet? I could see why you might have. The only thing is, Andy, what if he walks him and then you're facing Bregman? That's not a good matchup for Libby at all. So that was kind of my thought process.
Yeah, I mean, once Libby gets into that mode, I mean, I understand that, yes, a left-on-left matchup to try and get that guy out, certainly, I understand it. You go to the guy that has proven in several spots before that he can get that guy out. And JoJo Romero proved that he could. I mean, we talk about going back and judging the results. That ended up working. Like, that decision was a good one in the moment.
But what did it mean?
What did it mean? The
they didn't have
cost
anybody
of
for
it
the
afterward.
Yeah.
When you try to pick up the pieces and see out the rest of the game, that is maybe where you have the one criticism. But at the same time, like, is that Ollie Marmol's fault? No. The fact that he doesn't have a right-handed reliever to turn to instead of JoJo Romero when he comes in and gets one batter, and I guess at that point you could have brought in somebody else because you don't need the three batter minimum.
You could have.
Yeah, you could have just started the inning with somebody else. Right. Like, some of that's injuries, some of that's nobody's fault, but the fact that the front office hasn't provided at least enough right-handed talent to have in that spot is not on Ollie Marmol. That's the plain truth.
Now, and then you could make the case that, well, they did provide them Ludus and Leahy, throw those guys, but I don't know that I personally believe they're better options than JoJo Romero, even as JoJo was getting his pitch count up, even off the, getting the out in the 7th, because he's done this before successfully. It's just one of those things that you had multiple opportunities to have somebody do a little bit more so that they didn't have to ask as much from JoJo. And in Gibby's case, he didn't quite get it done. Couldn't get out of that 6th inning. So what do? You go earlier to Kittredge. Kittredge does get out of the 6th and the 7th if Gorman does his job and doesn't. I think he tried. It was a carom off of the pitcher, and he ran up and tried to catch it on the short hop. He charged it aggressively. I think he had time to just wait for it, set his feet, and throw. Mauricio Dubon runs pretty well, but I think he could have absolutely taken more time with that play. And then you don't need to see that Romero versus Jordan matchup in the 7th. You can save it for the 8th as out number 1 with nobody on base, lower stress, and then maybe JoJo is more inclined, feeling the game rather than having to sit down and get back up before facing a really good hitter like Alex Bregman. It's those little tiny margins that you don't have the room for error when the offense is not able to consistently get you an 8-run, 9-run game. We're not asking for much, Andy, but every week to 10 days to have a game like that so that you can rest the prime bullpen guys, the Cardinals could really use that, and the offense has just not quite gotten there. They're better than they were at the beginning of the year, but they haven't gotten to that level consistently, and now we're seeing the downstream effects of that, along with some of the stuff we're going to talk with Will Carroll about, just injuries. There are 3 righties that they thought they'd have: Giovanni Gallegos, Keenan Middleton, and you forget, too, Riley O'Brien. Like, those 3 would have been all eligible for that spot in the 8th inning last night, and none of them are on the active roster.
And it's tough, because you're trying to put the pieces together. And it's hard also to maybe talk about the offense maybe needed to pick them up on a night where they had 3 home runs. Nolan Gorman had 2, right?
That's Nolan Gorman. That's
Nolan
just
Gorman.
one guy.
Well,
Alan
Burleson did. Come on.
2 guys.
2 guys.
2 guys did their job.
Everyone else, not so much. I get
Where
it.
are you? Where are you? That's all.
Where are they? And I mean, again, it's tough to have that start to a series when you use the leverage guys, I guess, except for Helsley. I mean, is certainly going to be available if he didn't get a chance, I suppose. But then you use those guys again again, you've got the second game of the series tonight. You better hope that you do your damage early against a rookie in Spencer Arrighetti.
Spencer Spaghetti.
Gotta get him. Got to get him. And Andre Plante has to provide at least a little bit, the bare minimum of 5 innings, you would think, for him to at least bridge that gap.
You're going to see multiple innings of Chris Roycroft tonight if Palante only goes 5. I can't imagine JoJo's available. I promise you he's not.
Probably not.
Kittredge is not going to be available. Helsley is, but only if you get to the 9th. It's a shame because Ludus had done a nice job the couple of times that they let him pitch, but he's somebody who's got options, and they had to bring up an arm that they believed could be fresh tonight. Like, as we'll talk with Will Carroll about, they're managing their bullpen almost day to day because of the situation that they're in. And so, as we'll get into more at 5:05, what does that mean, Andy? It might mean that John Mozeliak needs to look to that trade market before we start talking about deadline time. Like, if you think this Cardinal team is one that's destined to contend, or you want it to be, you might have to do some movement a lot earlier than July 31.
We'll see. 875 KTGR. Give us your thoughts on the Cardinals. Unable to get it done last night against the Astros, but a chance tonight to even the series.